We're apt to talk about pacing and stakes in film and television, but I think we often overlook escalation. I'm a huge fan of escalation because, with good escalation, you get deeper stakes and tenser pacing. I define escalation as a pathway within a piece of media that logically increases the piece's ability to make more radical decisions in storytelling or thematic elements. With good escalation, the audience is unlikely to notice the situation getting more robust, perhaps stranger, what have you. But bad escalation can rip the pacing out from underneath the audience and leave us feeling really confused, or it shoots the stakes in the foot and we're indifferent to whatever it is that we were supposed to care about. I think people have started noticing this a lot with superhero films, and that's been leading people to feel that Marvel and DC burnout. The escalation is almost always the same, which causes sort of a tedious boredom coming through the movie. Escalation, to me, is the base layer that allows us to care about the logical conclusions the media is trying to make. Now, escalation exists in all types of media, even if it sounds like it probably mostly belongs to action and horror. But Meg Ryan hopping on a plane to Seattle to, essentially stalk Tom Hanks in Sleepless in Seattle is indeed escalation. And it comes at a critical point in the movie, after we've gotten to know Meg Ryan's character and we've begun to root for her. So when she makes such an intense decision, not only does it increase the pacing, anticipation, and the stakes, it's timed in a way that makes us feel somehow, less weird about her creepy behavior. Alfred Hitchcock called these icebox scenes, where later we might dwell on her decision and find it a little startling, but in the moment the escalation works well and so we don't notice. Alfred Hitchcock does define an icebox scene as something that doesn't totally make sense or maybe breaks the progression of the film, but if done well, the audience doesn't realize this until they're pulling the chicken out of the icebox to thaw, and we have a few spare minutes to think about the internal logic of the piece. Some modern critics say that if you notice an icebox scene in the moment, you're likely to call it a plot hole. Escalation helps to smooth that out. If we're properly amped up, we're less likely to see all those holes. Directors can create sharp escalation on the cheap, like in Scream or Psycho, where we kill the most famous actor early on, and that leaves the audience feeling like anything can happen. Now, it's important to note that once escalation is raised, it's unlikely to go down, so even though another murder doesn't happen for quite a while, it's the pacing that's affected as opposed to the escalation. This is important because audiences do need moments of quiet to help offset terror, action, or even embarrassment that often comes from escalation in comedy films. But once the bar has been moved, escalation should only continue to rise throughout the film while vying with the stakes and pacing to make sure the audience continues to feel the way that the creators want. Decreasing escalation to only increase it later does happen, but that usually kills tension. Now, we're most likely to see those sharp rises in big studio films at the climax of each act and then again at the end of the act. Many studio films use 3-act structures broken into the build-up, confrontation, and resolution. Please note there are many other dramatic structures that exist. This is specifically for most Hollywood studio films. To me, though, the best form of escalation is when escalation happens very organically, step by step, and driven by character actions. It's easy to escalate by outright murder or intense hijinks, but again, this is usually more noticeable and can lead the audience to experience pacing and stakes in a more extreme way. That can become disjointed. I think the best example of escalation I've got is Return of the Living Dead, one of, if not the first, zombie comedy. If you haven't seen it, the film riffs on Night of the Living Dead. It was written by one of Night of the Living Dead's original creators. It's a punk rock send-up of the zombie genre, featuring fast-running, intelligent zombies that wreak havoc on the outskirts of Louisville, Kentucky. Every choice the characters make leads to a smooth escalation pathway towards one of the most upsetting endings in horror. And it all starts with the smack of a canister, quote-unquote, built by the Army Corps of Engineers. We then have to take down a reanimated cadaver in a medical supply warehouse. Of course, we do that by destroying the brain, but that doesn't work. So if that doesn't work, well then what do? Well, you chop up the body. But what do you do with all the body parts? Well, thankfully, they're right next to a cemetery, and the boss knows the mortician that owns the cemetery, and the mortician has a crematorium. So if you can't kill it, burn it. That makes sense. And if that can work for one creature, well, it can work for all of the other creatures brought back to life in the warehouse, right? Well, burning the corpses just sends the chemical into the air, mixed with rain. It brings back every dead body in the cemetery. More and more choices pile on, each one making sense, but each one is impossible to sustain as the escalation grows and the characters become desperate. The pathway is so smooth, the character interactions fast and punchy, the stakes getting increasingly more dire, and the pacing ramping up to match the escalation pathway. I'd say it's close to perfect, and few films rival it. I can't recommend it enough. Plus, it has Tom Matthews in it, and he's so dreamy, ooh woo. So, take a moment the next time you're watching one of your favorite films. Remove the stakes and try to remove the pacing for a second, and see how well the film has characters make choices, how well the scenes unfold, one after the other, and let me know how smooth an escalation pathway exists. It's a great way to breathe new life into a film you've watched 100 times. Just how much did the creators get away with because they escalated everything just right?